Hello and welcome to another episode of Gemstone Mine. I'm John, and today we do not have a lesson from EDH because we are still talking about the new system of brackets. You may remember last time we talked a little bit about my initial thoughts on brackets. Well, I still have some things that I've been working on with them. Number one, I have been going through and revising some of my decks, trying to see if I can fit them into the brackets I want them to be in. Number two, I'm still trying to brew some interesting new CDH decks, but those I think I'm going to put a little bit of a pause on while we're going through this information on the brackets. And number three, I wanted to try to better understand what these brackets meant. There's been a lot of discussion about them through multiple different creators, including folks right here on Commander Cookout Media Group. Ryan and Brando talked about them at length on the main Commander Cookout podcast. They also had an episode that Ryan did where he went into great detail about his thoughts on the brackets and his usual level of excitement about things. To be clear, I think I may have softened my position a little bit on the bracket system. I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make these work well, but today I want to focus on how we can use the resources we have available to try to build decks that really do try to fit into that system. But before we go any further, Gemstone Mine Podcast is part of the Commander Cookout Media Group, and if you're enjoying the stuff here on this episode, be sure to check out everything else that Commander Cookout has to offer, and don't forget to check our sponsors. FusionGamingOnline.com, they are your source for all your gaming needs. And as usual, I've got cards that I want to pick up from the new set. Maybe I'll give that Ketramos deck a chance. I'm always interested to see how Orzhov works in ZDH. But I think the new Monster Manual is going to be out by the time this comes out, and Fusion doesn't just have Magic cards, they have stuff for games of all sorts. And since I like chucking dice just as much as I like flopping cards, I'm going to make sure to get what I need from FusionGamingOnline.com, your source for all your gaming needs. So my focus today is going to be on brackets 1 through 3. I went into a much greater detail when I broke down the brackets over on the last episode that we did. However, my goal today is to focus just on those first 3 brackets, which are specifically going to include a minimal either 0, 0, or up to 3 game changers in brackets 1, 2, and 3 respectively. My goal is to look at how you can make use of tutors in each of these brackets in ways that are both following the letter and the spirit of the law with this new bracket system. So that's what I'm trying to aim for with this. And to that end, I'm trying to use a resource that I know that CDH players like myself really love, Moxfield. Moxfield is one of the big online deck building websites, which along with Architect has gained a lot of popularity over the years. Personally, I've migrated over to Moxfield, and I really love how excellent and responsive the development team is. Harry, thank you for putting together such an amazing tool. And one of the tools that we're going to use is a resource on Moxfield called Packages. Packages are essentially mini deck lists that you can subscribe to for $0. It's not like it's a subscription fee or anything like that. But once you have favorited or subscribed to a package, you can then later click on a button in your deck builder on Moxfield and literally just import that entire package into your deck. It's nice because these packages are actually pretty smart. So Moxfield will automatically exclude cards which are not part of your deck's color identity. My goal with this was to try to use it in ways similar to what I've done before, where I've built packages for myself to make my life easier when I'm trying to include lands. After our last set of episodes talking about the land math that Frank Karsten and other pros like Reed Duke have done, I went through and built packages for shock lands, fetch lands, for the duels, just so that way I didn't have to think about, oh wait, what's the fetch land that I'm missing? I don't remember. I can just click on a button and bring it over. So for example, if I'm in this deck and I want to go ahead and add my necessary shock lands and dual lands, I'm in Sultai, so I'm going to click on this lightning bolt here at the top of the page, click add packages, and I am going to go ahead and add my shock lands. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my surveil lands, And let's get my battle lands in there. And, let's get the rainbow lands. And now sometimes you do need to refresh to actually get it to show up. But when you do, you just take a look and bam, it's got a nice selection of lands already in there, and it saves a lot of time. So I've taken this tech and tried to include it with a set of packages of tutors specifically. Now, if you look at the bracket system says that for brackets 1 and 2, you're allowed a few tutors, which WotC didn't really define what they meant by that. I'm personally following what the folks over at Moxfield have done, where they've interpreted this to mean 3 or fewer tutors. And I think it's pretty reasonable. Like in bracket 1, when you're having your theme deck, your exhibition deck, it kind of makes sense that you might want to include a couple of tutors, just so that way you could try to find the pieces of cards you really want to show off. Like if you're playing your deck where you're trying to ship Jace and Vraska and have their little kid Loot show up, that's fine, just go ahead and include your tutors. You're not doing it to try to ruin anybody else's bad time, you're trying to do it to show off. That's perfect, go for it. And I'm really glad that WotC has acknowledged this. I'm also pleased to see that they included in brackets 2 as well. But it's not until bracket 3 where you theoretically get an unlimited number of tutors. The only restriction in bracket 3 is you're limited to 3 game changers. Remember, no game changers in brackets 1 or 2. But in addition, in bracket 3, you are supposed to avoid early 2-card combos. I would have liked a little bit more guidance on what quote-unquote early means, but I'm personally taking that to mean that the general philosophy for bracket number 3 should be we want to avoid having our tutors specifically there to tutor for our win cons. In general, brackets 1, 2, and 3 should be tutoring for cards that they need to kind of get their game plan on the road. So being able to look for an engine piece, or be able to look for a pet card or a hidden commander, I think all of that is perfectly appropriate for brackets 1, 2, and 3. To that end, I built a package on Moxfield that has pretty much every tutor that I think is appropriate for these brackets 1, 2, and 3. I wanted to try to make sure of a couple of things with this. I wanted this to be something that basically any players could make use of and simply drag and drop it directly into their deck list. But as I began adding more and more tutors, I pretty quickly realized that there are a lot of cards that I wanted to comment on, which would make this really unwieldy. Like, this is 53 cards in this package. And it started to get out of hand, frankly. So what I did instead is I went through and built a primer for this with links to each of the underlying packages that you can then use to drag and drop into your deck. For example, I made a set of artifact-based tutors. This includes a much smaller number of cards which you can then include in your artifact-focused decks. Specifically, this includes your Goblin Engineer and Reckless Handling in red, War of Invention in blue, Inventor's Fair in any color, and the new Bright Glass Gearhulk from Aetherdrift in the green and white decks. So this obviously doesn't include every kind of tutor for artifacts. I included all of those Trophy, Trinket, Tribute, Treasure, and Transit mages in the sideboard. You'll know which decks are going to be the ones that want those particular mages. But the idea behind this, if I decide I'm building a deck that I need to have an artifact tutor in, I can pretty easily just go ahead and drag and drop it. It's really nice. So what I've done is I've built out these packages for multiple different types of decks. I don't think that every deck needs every tutor, and I think this is part of the reason why the signpost unconditional tutors of Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, and Imperial Seal are included on the Game Changers list. I also think that this is why the most efficient top deck tutors, Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, and Worldly Tutor, are part of the Game Changers list as well. WotC kind of wants to restrict those early fast tutors to minimize the consistency of a lot of decks, especially in brackets 2 and 3, to minimize the chances of games unexpectedly ending early out of nowhere. I want to briefly talk about how I went about building these packages. I wanted to do this with the intention that you should have to do minimal tweaking in low color decks to actually get this package to work without changing the actual bracket that you are listed at on Moxfield. Like if somebody's trying to build a bracket 2 deck so they can play against their friends' tweaked precons, I don't want to just drag in Vampiric Tutor and Imperial Seal. That's not what you would want to be playing in that bracket anyway. Instead, I wanted to include cards that were specifically not game changers. Now, that said, I still like optimizing decks. So I tried to make sure to include cards which, in my mind, represented the best in-class tutors, usually meaning I showed a preference for lower mana value over higher mana value. I don't want to be spending 4 mana on a Diabolic Tutor when I could spend 3 mana on a Grim Tutor if I really wanted an unconditional tutor, frankly. There's better options that are there, and I go through them in the packages that are listed here. I also tried to respect budgets to a degree. I've been playing Magic for a long time. For a really long time. Wait, how? That said, not everybody has been playing Magic as long as I have, or necessarily wants to splurge on so many expensive cards. So for that reason, I also tried to make sure that these packages limit themselves to cards that cost $20 or less. At least at the time that I'm recording this. They may fluctuate over time in the future, and I may try to update them going forward, but I don't necessarily plan to have that be a regular part of my routine. I did include cards in the sideboards of these decks if they are more expensive. Some of them, like Intuition, personally, I think that should be a game changer. I think it is a crime that they did not include that on the game changers list, frankly. Anyway, I'm not in charge of the game changers list, so I included it as a sideboard card in these packages. Number 2, I wanted to try to make sure that these tutors basically function out of the box or function well together. For example, I made one package of tutors, which I call it the Demon Tutors. This is specifically a 3-card package in mono black, which I have on the screen here, which includes Baragoth Bloodsky Sire, Demonic Council, and Lively Dirge. Remember, that is Demonic Council, not Demonic Consultation. This package is fairly interchangeable as a way to be able to get to an unconditional tutor. If you draw Demonic Council early, you can just tutor for Baragoth. On the next turn, you can then play Baragoth, and the turn after that, you can start some unconditional tutoring to assemble the cards you're looking for. However, if you draw Demonic Council late, instead of going to get Baragoth, you may already have Delirium, which means that you will be able to just tutor up whatever you want. And I think an unconditional late-game tutor is well within the bounds of brackets 2 and 3. Likewise, Lively Dirge is in there because it is both an Entomb and a Reanimate. It can be a fantastic way to just go and tutor up Baragoth, throw it in your graveyard, and then reanimate it along with potentially a little 1-drop creature. Or if you happen to lose an important creature late game that you need to get back, just go ahead and cast Lively Dirge for the Reanimate mode, and it's still pretty reasonable at that point. This is the type of package that I consider to be ideal when I was building these, something that you can just drag and drop into any mono black deck that is looking for a handful of tutors and have a reasonable package to work with. I built out a few other ones for things like equipment, creatures, particular kindred types like wizards and like goblins, kindreds that are reasonably well included and usually fairly easy to include in a particular deck because they offer a lot of depth in that creature type. I also wanted to try to include the classic creature tutors and spell tutors, but I also did a package that was here just for using the transmute cards out of the original Dimir Guild in the first Ravnica set. Again, this is not supposed to be a comprehensive list, although I do include a lot of them in the sideboard, but rather the best ones available in these colors to use. Transmute was kind of interesting because it allowed you to spend 3 mana and a card to pitch that card that had Transmute on it, and then go find another card in your deck that shared a mana value with it. It was a pretty sweet little mechanic, and it makes for a pretty good sorcery speed tutor. 3 mana is reasonable, and it's not a tutor that can be countered. In addition, you have to show the table what you got afterwards, and I think that is something that plays a lot better in brackets 1, 2, and 3. Usually in bracket 1, you want to show off what you got anyway, and usually in brackets 2 and 3, you're kind of giving a little bit of warning if you are going to do something powerful. This is a case where that package is going to ask you to please look closely and exclude parts of the package which don't play into your game plan. So it's not quite perfect where I can anticipate what you're going to be looking for when you click on that package, but it should give you the tools and save you a bunch of unnecessary scryfall searches to find the cards that work well for you. Overall, I'm kind of happy to see that tutors are becoming more ubiquitous and something that WotC is not just expecting people to have, but are actually encouraging players to include as a part of their deck to make them a little bit more consistent. I hope this will break some of the stigma that's been around tutors as long as I've been playing Commander, and try to make it so we're having decks that have a little bit more focused game plans, which is personally the way that I most enjoy playing Commander. I'm going to include a link to the primary package as well as all of the sub-packages down in the description of this episode. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please, helps a lot to give a like or a subscribe on the platform where you're enjoying it. And don't forget to check out the other content from the Commander Cookout Media Group. If you have any questions, you can always email us at gemstoneminepodcast@gmail.com or add us on Blue Sky, where we are at GemstoneMineMTG. Until next time, I'm John, and this is Gemstone Mine.